And now, biographer Craig Nelson from the Bookguys radio show in Washington, D.C. He answers questions from callers on his latest, a biography of American revolutionary Thomas Paine. This is just under an hour.
He was irascible, argumentative, difficult. You apply the appropriate adjective, but he also changed history. Hi, I'm Mike Cuthbert, and with Alan Stipek, Senior Appraiser with the American Society of Appraisers, we're the Bookguys. He was Thomas Paine, and his biographer Craig Nelson reminds us that Paine helped create both the American and the French revolutions. Craig Nelson joins us in this special C-SPAN edition of the Bookguys. You can get on subsequent programs to ask us anything and everything about books by calling us at 1-800-828-BOOK. That's 828-2665. Or you can reach us on the email link on our website, bookguys.com. We're glad you're with us for the Bookguys. Hi, everybody. In addition to welcoming our guest this week, we'd like to welcome a national audience on C-SPAN. We'll have a Bookguys quiz later. You'll be eligible to win valuable books on books as our prize for correct answers to our question. And for you radio listeners, check C-SPAN on our webpage for notice about when the telecast of this week's show can be seen. For those of you who are seeing us for the first time, hope you're over the shock. We're glad to have you with us for what should be a very special hour. Good to have you. Craig Nelson is our special guest, and you know the founding fathers of the United States are generally considered to be those who met in the Continental Congress and declared the Declaration of Independence, forged the Constitution, and passed the Bill of Rights. But there was one among them who did none of those things, but who inspired them all. He was a man much reviled in his day, imprisoned for his efforts in France, and under a death sentence in England. There was none among the founding fathers who could claim in honesty to have been a founder of the U.S., the French Republic, the creator of the phrase United States of America, and have written three of the biggest bestsellers of the 18th century. This was Thomas Paine. Craig Nelson, author of The First Heroes about the Doolittle raid on Tokyo and a travel book, Let's Get Lost, as well as a longtime editor at HarperCollins, turns his attention to Paine in a new biography that extends the biography to its subject's impact on government even today. Paine was, above all, both in style and content, a writer for the masses. His arguments for the rights of citizens and for political and religious freedom were written for popular consumption and effect. And he found both effect and consumption in spades. Craig, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. I don't know if I have anything to add after that. That was a wonderful introduction.
First, set the framework for us. Paine was the ultimate child of the Enlightenment. For those who have forgotten or whose memory is fuzzy, discuss that period and what gave rise to it on such a broad scale and allowed Paine to emerge.
Well, the Enlightenment is something I think confuses us all because today we think it's Buddhist or some other Asian item, but it actually was sort of an upheaval. It was basically the result of 200 years of the Renaissance when the printing press had become so widespread that it was now inexpensive to produce printed materials for the first time. At the same time that Martin Luther's Reformation had gotten a huge swath of the European public to learn how to read. So everyone was reading, and what they were reading were the politics of Hobbes and Locke, and the natural philosophy of science was then called of Newton, who explained that if you notice the waves and notice the planets and notice the sea and the composition of light, all of this could be explained with numbers. And the combination of all of this sort of made everyone's heads blow up. It's the only way I can describe it, that people really started questioning everything. Everyone went on campaigns of self-education. When you tour an 18th century house, you almost always see compasses and astrolabes and telescopes that they had engineered for themselves.
The autodidact was king?
Exactly. And Paine is really an epical figure because he was entirely self-taught. At the age of 20, he had joined the 7 Years' War by working as a state-sanctioned buccaneer, and he had made so much money he was able to take 2 years off and educate himself in the values of the Enlightenment and impress the famous men he met after.
As book people, we should note that it was a vast change from the period preceding it. The Enlightenment was the period of the creation of the novel, autobiographies, dictionaries, encyclopedias, science fiction, all based on the principles you were talking about, self-education. The question is, how much did Paine help to create that atmosphere versus being liberated to write as he did by it?
Well, out of all of the books that you read from this era, Paine's were the one that spoke to ordinary people. And his writing style is so dramatically modern that when you're in the bowels of 18th century archives and you're reading all these other things, and then you get to him, it's like being smacked in the face. It's like having a bowl of water poured on you, and you really feel like you're talking to someone who's sitting right next to you instead of someone in the silk stockings and powdered wigs and makeup of their own time.
At the same time, you point out that the Spectator of Addison and Steele had quite an impact on Paine's thought and of public receptiveness of his more radical ideas. What was that impact of the Spectator?
Well, one of the big problems for Paine biographers is that late in life, he responded to an attack by saying that he never read any John Locke. So ever since then, we've all been trying to find, well, how did he get all of the ideas of John Locke, which are in his books, if he never read any? And I think that he got it by reading the Collected Spectator, which was a newspaper published by Addison and Steele in the early 1700s, which became in its collected edition a highlight of the Enlightenment. And I really came to believe that Addison was sort of a secret godfather of the United States because he was so beloved by Washington and Franklin and Adams. Everyone quoted him. Patrick Henry's favorite lines are an aspect of Addison. George Washington had his play performed. So it's impossible that Paine did not read The Spectator, and that's where I think he got his political education.
Our guest is Craig Nelson. His book is Thomas Paine, Enlightenment, Revolution, and the Birth of Modern Nations. Just to give us an example, here's a passage from, I think, Common Sense. In England, a king hath little more to do than to make war and give away places, which in plain terms is to impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. A pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed 800,000 sterling a year for and worshipped into the bargain. Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. That's hardly the usual 18th century speech.
No kidding. And where this came from really is still a mystery. I tried to come up with as many sources as I possibly could. Some of it comes from the way that science writing was being done at the time. And I think a lot of it comes from that he wanted people to hear him talking. That he knew that a lot of people who would be receiving this material wouldn't be reading it, they would be hearing it read to them. So he wrote as though he were speaking, which is a fundamental of good writing in our own time.
Doesn't he go into the common man a lot? So doesn't he pick up the vernacular when he speaks?
Well, he was a working class man. His father made what were called stays that were a combination bustier and corset, or something like Madonna wears on stage today. But they were very popular, and he learned to do that. Then he was a taxman, which was also a working class occupation. So he spent the first 37 years of his life trying to make a living as a working man in England and failing, and that's what his background was, in contrast to almost every other American founder.
When style was so important and remains so important in writing, I wondered as I read your book how much of an affirmation of his anti-establishment attitudes was his writing style. In other words, it was shrewdly calculated to set himself apart from the establishment, the academy, and all the rest.
Well, it was a period when working class people were debating whether or not they should have monarchs. And so I almost think that he may have transcribed almost the kind of debates he would have had at the taverns and places where they had their clubs and Enlightenment men's organizations, and put it into writing the way he would have talked it over beer and grog with his friends at these pubs.
And I'm sure he heard a lot of backlash when he was collecting taxes, too.
Exactly.
Which is where the common man would vocalize their
right.
objection.
One of the things that happens to Paine, we'll get into more detail when we get to the Age of Reason later, which got him in so much trouble. But he was unique in being, it seems, in being pursued for his anti-establishment religion views, and yet it seems only logical. During the Enlightenment, that if all things were open to question, including science, religion would be one of those. How did Paine manage to get himself singled out for attention by the religious establishment?
Well, I actually think it wasn't the first Age of Reason that did it. It was the Age of Reason Part 2. Paine wrote the original Age of Reason inspired by the rise of atheism in France, which was being led by a man named Hébert, who changed the name Cathedral of Notre Dame to Temple of Reason and was burning down churches and killing priests. And Paine was horrified by all of this. So the first Age of Reason is actually a call to arms for a reason why you should believe in God, even if it's not necessarily the God that's in the Bible. Then he lands up in prison during the terror, and when he gets out, he's spiritually destroyed, and that's when he decides to respond to the critics of the first Age of Reason with the second one, which is pretty much a crank man attacking the Bible, like a nut on late.
You say, but a nut, but here's a man who lucked out and did not get his head chopped off, only by an act of fate, which was basically the door being closed, that he was not numbered, of which I'm sure you'll elaborate on later.
Sure.
But the issue is, it's similar of anybody that goes into a situation where they rely on a God, they look for spiritual support, and nothing comes. And it's like people who survived the Holocaust.
Yes.
How can there be a God? How can there be
Yes.
an individual who would allow this to happen to me?
Right.
So it's really not cranky. It's actually a response. At least the way I read into it, it's a perfect response at the time for a person who is an intellectual, who is in jail with a lot of other intellectuals. They're discussing mortality, their lives, the situation of the revolution going totally haywire, and with the justification for it no longer having any substance whatsoever. And here he is, we had typhoid. I mean, this is a
Right.
man who was very lucky he survived.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of his colleagues, from Franklin to Robespierre and
Oh.
Napoleon himself, didn't have very different feelings about religion from Paine, but they didn't go out and write this down and publish it.
Well, they
So-
weren't jailed for a period of time.
Exactly.
And many of the founding fathers cite Paine as a guide to their own religious feelings,
Yeah.
the deists particularly, of whom it seems the majority of the founding fathers were deists.
Yes, pretty much all of them. Yes, that's what I ran across again and again in Paine. I would find a founding father who'd done something much more outrageous than Paine. Probably the great example is Washington freeing his slaves in his will. That was probably the most radical, progressive, avant-garde thing anyone did from that generation, but Paine is the one who has the reputation for being the crazed firebrand.
Craig Nelson is our guest. His book is Thomas Paine, Enlightenment, Revolution, and the Birth of Modern Nations. Let's go back to his common roots again. Discuss the Headstrong Club in Lewis and its importance in developing his ideas and his oratorical skills.
Well, Paine gave up trying to become a stay maker, which his father had taught him to do, and he ended up going into the excise as a tax collector, and he ended up being assigned to one of the most beautiful towns in all of England, which is Lewis. And there he joins up with a club who have political debate every Tuesday night. And the debate, it seems, swirled a great deal around a man named John Wilkes, who was confronting the English government by attacking the king and attacking the king's mother and being jailed for dissent and then getting out of jail. And you really can see in Wilkes a sort of spiritual predecessor of Paine. They were both sort of pugnacious. They both had these fantastic witticisms they would drop off. One of the best one was for Wilkes was that he was trying to see how much free speech existed in England, and he was going to find out. Anyway, and the Headstrong Club was a sort of very typical club of its day, where men would get together and drink, and they had various kinds of snacks, and they would discuss politics, pretty much the way any sports bar today discusses a football game. So.
I don't want to run too far ahead, but we've got to get to common sense. You point out that at the time of the writing, well, let me put it this way. In music, Bach is the great summarizer. Beethoven is the great revolutionary. Beethoven more or less created the Romantic period. Bach summarized the Baroque period. I was trying to think of Paine that way. Would you say he was the Bach of his age in summarizing everything and popularizing it and sort of saying that's the way it is? Or Beethoven? He was the one who stood out and led.
Well, Paine did two things that were wildly revolutionary with common sense. And really, to any historian who works on common sense, it's sort of like something that appears out of nowhere. It's like it's spewed by lava out of the earth. It's impossible to imagine where this thing came from. Because what it does is it explains to Americans who at the time were very proud to be Englishmen and very proud of their English history and thought that England had the best government in the world and thought that if they left England, they would be preyed upon by France and Spain and Indians and all these kinds of fears and feelings and emotions going on. And Paine, with common sense, very carefully explains why. You don't need to be English. You don't need a king. You just need the law. You don't need a Parliament of Lords. You just need your own Congress. Everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. And it sort of is... weeks earlier, John Adams had said more or less similar things in the Continental Congress, which was the most radical group of Americans at that time and had almost been kicked out of the Continental Congress for saying such things. But people, when they read Paine saying it, thought it was perfectly reasonable. And the second thing he did that I thought was so extraordinary with that was that he addressed everyone collectively. When everyone was thinking of themselves as a New Yorker or a Georgian or a Virginian, Paine said, we're all in this together. We're all colonialists. We're all Americans. And everyone started thinking of themselves as Americans after Common Sense came out. So I guess I'd have to go with Beethoven.
I agree with it. I'm a Beethoven, too.
Our subject is Thomas Paine, as portrayed in the biography by Craig Nelson, Thomas Paine, Enlightenment and Revolution and the Birth of Modern Nations. We say nations because the United States came out of Paine, but also, as we mentioned in the introduction, France. We'll find out how Common Sense got translated and how important it was to them in just a moment. We're the Book Guys.
30-second breaks.
Oh, good.
Okay, you're in the middle of your first. Okay, so we go right back onto Mike.
I'm Mike Cuthbert, along with Alan Stipek. Craig Nelson is our guest, Thomas Paine our subject, and we're welcoming C-SPAN viewers to our program this week. You state that the problem with Paine was that though he was reviled by the powerful, it wasn't because they disagreed with him, because he was so widely read.
Exactly.
Too many people were listening to what he was saying, both in the colonies and in England and in France. How soon did Common Sense get translated and begin to show an impact in these other countries?
Immediately. It was translated across all of Europe within months of coming out of the United States. Now, they took out the parts about how we can get rid of a king and all of those parts.
Bowdlerized.
Yes, exactly. But it was a huge sensation in all of Europe.
And such a sensation that he could have made tons of money and been like John Grisham or David Baldacci and just didn't care what he wrote anymore.
Yes, he would have been the richest author of all time if he had gotten paid.
But first of all, he didn't get paid. And second of all, what little he got paid, he gave to other people throughout his career. Why did he do this?
Well, he originally came from two reasons. The first is that the United States had no copyright laws when Common Sense came out. So anyone could print it who wanted to print it and not pay him. And the second reason was that he came up under this Enlightenment Roman thinking that you were supposed to do whatever you could to improve the lives of all mankind. And what he thought he should do was forego his royalties to make the book so inexpensive that anyone who wanted to could afford to buy it. And the third thing he did was donate all of the money for mittens for the Continental Army.
Right.
So it was a three-pronged strategy.
He should have been able to buy a lot of mittens then.
Yes, well, the book was pirated very quickly. It was so successful so fast that it ended up being pirated.
But he did this later as well.
Yes, he forego all of his royalties again and again to make the book so cheap so that more people would buy it.
And he ended up, of course, wealthy.
Well, only because he got rewarded for his service to America,
We'll get to
not
that,
for a writer.
that part of the story a little bit later. The American Crisis actually contains Paine's single, probably most famous line, "These are the times that try men's souls." was the context and the impact of that series as opposed to Common Sense?
Well, originally Paine wanted to be a soldier in the Revolution, and so he signed up to join the Army. He was made an aide-de-camp to General Greene. Through Greene, he met Washington, with whom he became an almost lifelong friend. But a number of people thought that maybe he should be writing instead of soldiering, and they urged him to go back and write. And as he hurried back, he realized that he needed to stir up the American spirit all over again because Washington was losing one battle after the next, after the next, after the next. So he wrote the first of 13 essays, which he called The American Crises, and the first one begins, "These are the times that try men's souls," which has appeared in the speeches of many presidents, American presidents, ever since.
And has occurred to many at various times.
Yeah. No, and on top of that, not only was Washington losing many, many battles, matter of fact, he didn't win any.
Exactly.
He was also losing 50, 60% of his army
Right.
to desertion or illness. And so
Right.
this was a situation where actually a really good writer was more important than another musket, I would imagine.
Exactly.
The pen was mightier.
Oh,
than the
exactly.
sword.
No
Yes.
question about it when you put it in perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For something completely different, Tom Paine, other than his nose, not an entirely ugly man. There are very few women in the story of Tom Paine. What happened?
Well, it's very mysterious. He left all of his documents to this family when he died, and they were stored in a barn in St. Louis, Missouri, and the barn burned down. So there's various gaps in his story, and the women is a big gap, and we don't really know what happened. He married very young. That wife gave birth, and she and the child died in childbirth. He then married a second wife, with whom he apparently never had sexual relations, but we don't know why that happened. And they separated without ever getting divorced, and we don't know why that happened either.
Well, that was almost a business relationship, wasn't it? It wasn't.
Well, we don't really know.
No, I
It's
mean,
very mysterious
yeah.
because what was Paine getting out of it if it was a business relationship? The grocery was failing when he took it over. So
Futures.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
The whole story is very
Yeah, I know. I was trying to
bizarre.
figure it out. I mean, what I enjoyed about your book was trying to get into the human elements
Yes.
more than anything else, and how a person reacts at a specific time. I mean, I know we're going to talk about his drinking and everything else, but I was trying to figure out why did he marry the second woman, and why did the marriage not get consummated? And I said, look, he probably had an idea that this is a good business move. And and it really wasn't working out. So since it wasn't working
Well,
out, then let
Which
it go.
would fit with all his other business decisions.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah, I'm not being-
That's
you know,
true.
I'm
You're
not
right.
trying
And you're right. It would be in character.
Exactly. So you try to put yourself into his character
Right.
at the time. You go, that makes sense.
Right.
You know,
But then why wouldn't he admit that? Why wouldn't he say that?
because he doesn't want to be seen to be a failure.
Oh.
But because most people made him a failure. I mean, you know this better than probably anybody else around,
Sure.
right? That he had failure thrust upon him more
Right.
than anybody I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Our guest is Craig Nelson. His book is Thomas Paine, Enlightenment, Revolution, and the Birth of Modern Nations. We're the book guys in Washington. What was the Silas Deane affair, and why, after it was over, was Paine unemployable by the U.S. government?
Well, this is one of the great undertold stories of the American Revolution. We could spend this entire show just talking about the Silas Deane affair, so I hopefully can wrap it up. What happened was that Benjamin Franklin and John Adams were over in France getting aid from the court of Louis XVI to help take down the court of King George. And during all of this, there became a confusion over which items the French were giving to the Americans and which they were selling to the Americans. And Silas Deane was the American commercial agent who was working with the playwright and watchmaker Caron de Beaumarchais in helping the American cause with this French material and supplies. And Silas shows up in America and says, we know you thought you were getting this for free, but in fact you have to pay for it and you owe us money. And then letters arrive from Adams and Franklin in Paris saying, no, you don't have to pay for it, it's a gift. And it became this incredible conflict and split really all of Congress in half. And at that time, Paine was serving as the secretary to the Committee of Foreign Affairs, and he became enraged that Silas Deane was trying to make money off the war effort, and very intemperately fired off a series of articles in a newspaper condemning him. And then his enemies in the Congress were able to use this to get him fired from this position.
Was he right or wrong about Deane?
He was, it turned out he was right.
Yeah, well, Dean also was the money behind the Green Mountain Boys. I mean,
Exactly.
he really, I mean, let's say for argument's sake, he's a patriot.
Yeah.
But he's also a profiteer.
Yeah.
And always was.
Yes.
And, you know, it's an interesting reality that Paine can realize this very early on and sees the transparency of it, which really is an issue because anybody who deals in foreign policy, especially at that time, knows that there is a lot of greasing of palms to get things done. I mean, we talk about Beaumarchais. He got, what, 1 million livres?
Yes.
In a deal with Franklin that only came out after Franklin's death,
Yes.
and which exonerated Franklin
Right.
from a situation also.
Probably more than he got for writing with Mozart.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so, I mean, the mechanisms of what was going on was so layered. I mean,
Yes.
in the reality of it, you have spying, you have profiteering, you have compassion, you have so many different variations
Right.
going on.
Well, it just occurred to me then, it might be that in addition to all the other things, father of the American Republic, the French Republic, the United States of America, Paine was the first whistleblower to meet ignominious defeat and
Exactly.
discouragement.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's somebody before him. Think about Callender, you think about Cobbett, you think
Yeah.
about, I mean, there are whistleblowers that, you know, but I mean, from a person engaged, literally engaged, he probably is. That's a good point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our guest is Craig Nelson. We're the Book Guys in Washington, and this special C-SPAN broadcast is focusing on Thomas Paine, the leader of one of the leaders of the Founding Fathers, who's very seldom, if ever, given credit for it because he was a controversial figure, but he started a whole new controversy by writing a letter to Monsieur Raynal. What was the letter to Monsieur Raynal, and how did that get him to France and in more trouble than he ever dreamed he'd get into?
Well, this is another great moment in publishing history where Paine tries to be employed in the United States, and he keeps failing at that, just as he failed in London. And so he decides to write a book review. He comes across a book on the history of the American Revolution written by a Frenchman, and it's filled with errors. So he decides to respond to it by writing one of his great attacks, which appears in France and becomes a huge bestseller when he has free copies shipped to every American living overseas. And because of this, he becomes so well known that when he goes to visit Franklin in Passy, which is a little town between Versailles and Paris, where Franklin was living, he's seen as being this famous American author and sort of treated royally. And he starts having second thoughts about what is he doing in the
At that
United
time
States.
of history, being treated royally was not a good idea. But not only was he treated royally, but he was treated even better than that. Eventually, he ended up becoming named a French citizen and part of the Parliament.
Yes, it's a really unbelievable story because after the peace is declared, Paine doesn't really have much of a job in the United States, and he returns to Europe. And because of his fame for common sense, he's staying with the wealthy rulers of Parliament in London, and because of his fame as an author, he's staying with his old friend Lafayette in Paris. So he's really living probably the greatest life anyone could have at that moment. And he's constantly hopping back and forth between the two. In fact, as a biographer, one of the great pains is trying to remember where he is during this period. But anyway.
I assume that was not a pun.
Yeah,
No,
can I ask you, before
apologize.
going further,
Yeah.
that's one of the things. How long was the trip normally from Paris to London at that time?
I think it was close to 2 months.
That's a
You
a
know,
lot of
door to
time.
door.
Door to door, you know.
Yeah,
when you-
travel was not fun.
yeah, I mean, you know, the amount of interaction he has with both sides of the channel are amazing. Then you put in perspective how much time he did traveling.
Yeah, but it gave him
Wow.
plenty of time to write.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. He must have had. That's where he got
Well,
his
but
writing
this is
time.
where I theorize he may have had some manic depressive issues because literally he moves constantly. Even in America during
Yeah.
the war, he's
Yeah.
staying with this friend in Pennsylvania, then he's in
Yeah.
Trenton, then he's here, then he's
He goes to-
constantly moving.
He's in
It's
New
astounding.
Rochelle, then he's in New York, he's in New Rochelle. I'm doing the mileage on this
Yes.
when I'm reading the book, and I was.
But all this leads to a serious and crucial question late in his life, and that is, what was he? Was he an Englishman? Was he a Frenchman? Or was he an American? And that question got him into a lot of trouble.
Exactly. He's jumping back and forth between England and France, and he really admires how American-style Republican democracy is being imported into Paris through Lafayette, who has established something of a constitutional monarchy in the wake of the fall of the Bastille. And then he goes to London, and especially his friend Edmund Burke is complaining about this, I thought somewhat ungenerously, frankly. And so Edmund Burke writes Reflections on the Revolution in France, and Paine replies with Rights of Man. And one of the great ironies of this story to me is in America, Paine is known for common sense, but Rights of Man is really his great American book, because Rights of Man is him explaining why the American government is so superior to the monarchies of Europe, and how ordinary citizens need to be involved with their government, just as aristocrats should be.
And of course, that won him favor and acclaim in France and got him under a death sentence in England.
Exactly.
The same words.
Exactly. He's accused of sedition in England, and he actually enjoys being so powerful that he gets accused of sedition in England, until one night he's at a dinner with his publisher, and another author is there, the great mystic and artist William Blake. And Blake turns to him and says, "You can't go home tonight." And he packs up and immediately moves to France, where he's been invited to join the National Assembly to write the French Constitution.
I have two questions to ask.
Can you do it after the break?
I have to.
We've got questions, just tons of questions for Craig Nelson. We also have some callers coming up with online appraisals. Nick Basbanes will be along, and we got the Book Guys quiz. It's going to be a busy end of the program this week. We're the Book Guys. Welcome back. Our guest is Craig Nelson. His book is Thomas Paine, Enlightenment, Revolution, and the Birth of Modern Nations. And Alan has two questions.
First question is, did William Blake know something, or was this just a feeling?
I think it was just a feeling.
Okay. Secondly, does Rights of Man create the knee-jerk reaction from William Pitt the Younger, or was William Pitt already the really adversarial person, the great loyalist that wanted to keep the monarchy going?
No, it was actually the spread of constitutional reformation societies in the wake of Rights of Man many, many months after it was published.
Okay, but you have to assume that Rights of Man is the influence for the reaction that Pitt has, correct?
I think it was the combination of the popularity of that book and the fear that the French Revolution was going to jump the channel and infect England.
Okay. Thank you.
There's much more to come. It was not really a happy ending for Thomas Paine, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Every week we have on our program a caller from abooks.com who is cooperating with us from their Treasures in Your Attic section of their webpage. These are books that people just wonder about, and they ask abooks.com. They say, oh, we don't know, let's ask the Book Guys. So we're going to go out to Pacifica, California, to Greg, who contacted first abooks.com. And he's got a question about a book, so let's ask him what it is, and welcome to the show, Greg.
Well, hello. Thank you.
Hi, Greg.
Hi. Nice talking to you guys. My book is called The Amateur Gentleman by Jeffrey Farnell, and it's dated 1913. And on the inside of it, it says there's an ex libris sticker that says Frederick W. Skiff, and then on the opposite page is the words, "O Spirit of Youth," and the signature Jeffrey Farnell.
Okay. We once had Steve Allen on the radio show, and I probably am the greatest fan of Steve Allen, as Mike knows and Steve Allen found out. But there's a standard joke. Name 2 songs that Steve Allen wrote, and he wrote 2,000. Can you tell me?
Oh, was it everything everything's coming up? No,
No.
no.
This
It's
will be
something
the
like
big.
that. Yeah,
This will be
yeah.
the start of something big.
Something big, yeah.
Okay, you now have 1,999 more to go.
Yeah, right.
Okay, Jeffrey Farnell was probably one of the most prolific novelists of the early 20th century. Extremely popular writer. Name another book he wrote.
Broad Highway.
There you go. Okay, were you doing a little research trying to find out about Amateur Gentlemen?
Well, yeah, and then I was reading a book called Living Authors, a biography of Jeffrey,
Right.
other authors.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, he's an American author, and you know, I hadn't seen a copy of this signed. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm being a little. Let's say I'm being a little rough. Unfortunately, at this time period, the popularity of early 20th century novelists, the majority, especially the not the great novelists, but the popular novelists, are very rarely collected. There just isn't a audience that's left that really wants these books, and that really fuels the marketplace. So realistically, if you were a bookseller and you needed to do some background doc on this book and you were looking at old catalogs, my guess is 35 years ago, you could probably see a catalog with the Jeffrey Farnell inscription for $150 possibly.
Sure.
And now that inscription would probably be worth maybe 1/3 because the popularity isn't there, but still people would be going back in the auction records and making a comparison and saying, well, if it was $150 35 years ago, let's do the inflation move here. That means it's worth $300 or $400. It's unfortunately not the way.
Sure, it's not like it's Samuel Clemens, you know.
Exactly. And I think that's usually how you have to approach novelists from that time period, unless you're dealing with their one key known book, and that becomes a isolated situation in a collecting perspective, or there's something to the inscription which has provenance or an association, and there's something that makes it stand out alone. But on an average value, I would have to unfortunately say that the market is going to generate the value, and in this situation, the market probably isn't as active as you would like to have.
Let me ask my favorite question, Greg. Have you Googled Frederick W. Skiff at all to find out anything about him?
You know, I did that this morning, and I was surprised to find that he's some well-known guy.
Yeah, what did he do?
Well, I think he was a book collector and also a praiser of sorts. Or, yeah, and it was very interesting. He was more interesting than.
Yeah, you see, that's the point. Now, at least let's take this the next step. You happen to be a cataloger for a bookstore or for an auction house, and you're trying to create some energy to sell this item. So now you're going to put together, and this is where Craig would be great because he is a very well-versed individual who, having read his book, I have to say is very engaging. He could probably write a catalog description which would just overwhelm an individual to want to buy it.
Well, there's another aspect. If he was a collector, you've got a potential collection here. Find the books that Frederick W. Skiff collected.
And when we have Nick on in the next 5 or 10 minutes, we'll ask him if he knows anything about it. So here you have potential opportunities to create a market in an area which has basically been evaporated because of age and disinterest.
Creative collecting, Greg.
So right now we have potential.
Gentlemen, I've heard so much about you guys, and I know you
It's
guys.
all lies. Huh?
Can I ask you one other
Sure
question
thing.
about a book called Living Leaders of the World from 1889, and it's got gilt covering and pictorial cover on it.
Yeah.
And is that a fairly common book, or?
It's put it this way. It's like the kind of book that you would see if you went into a bookstore now that would have instant biographies of the leaders. That was their time periods comparison. Valuable now is more the cosmetic nature of it, and the text of the book would run a second to the plates and to the presentation. So,
Gentlemen.
$35, $50 probably.
Okay, Greg?
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you for being with us. That's Greg out in Pacifica, California. And speaking of Nick Basbanes and Thomas Paine, we should remember that Thomas Paine was a best-selling author of, we would call them books, but they were pamphlets. And Nick is going to be talking about collecting pamphlets. How's that for a lead-in, Nick?
Well, there you go. Really, pamphlets. I guess another description of pamphlets could be ephemera. I imagine.
We Payne biographers don't prefer ephemera.
Right. Yeah. And we're pamphleteers at this table.
Well, we're pamphleteers, but
and we have a team named the Pamphleteers. Right.
but when these objects were when these artifacts were printed and published, I wonder if the publishers expected them to last as artifacts. Certainly not in libraries. And I've maintained in my especially in my book A Gentle Madness, 1995, that the first great collector of pamphlets and indeed the first great collector of ephemera was a man by the name of George Thomason in England, 100 years even before the American Revolution, during the years of the English Civil War. He was a royalist, and he was a bookseller in London. Very little is known about him. We don't even know the year of his birth. We think around 1600. But during the 9 years of the English Civil War and during the 11 or so years of the interregnum, the British Commonwealth, this man collected something on the order of 22,000 pamphlets on both sides of the conflict, royalist as well as parliamentarian, and he did it totally unknown to anyone else. He was a bookseller. He gathered things. He hid them in wagons. He attempted once to even bury them in the ground. He thought once of shipping them to Holland. He died obscurely, buried in an unmarked grave, and 20 years afterwards, his family offered these pamphlets, 2,000 volumes containing 22,000 objects, for sale to the government. They were purchased for £300, and they are now regarded as the absolute most important, most significant archive of materials that you could possibly find on that whole period, covering both sides of the conflict. And they were all pamphlets, fugitive pieces, often even published on the fly. Presses hidden, kept away from scrutiny, and this man managed to collect 22. It's an amazing story and so little known.
Let me ask Craig, when you deal with original sources with Payne, what is the condition of most of the best in shape Payne pamphlets? Are any of them bound, or are they in paper wraps and pretty tough to keep together?
Well, they've been in print continuously for 200 years, so depending on which decade you pick, the originals, the manuscript of Common Sense still exists. It's in Philadelphia. I got to see it, and that was quite thrilling. Cool. Like many authors, Payne designed his own cover. Then the originals were all done as printed folios. I think they're called octavos, and so they were all 46 pages, and then they were just either sewn or stapled in the middle.
And Payne was a bestseller. We have to remember.
Huge, many times.
Yes.
These little pamphlets were not scarce. People had access to them. The items in the Thomason collection, so many of them are unique. They only exist in these single copies.
While we've got you, we just had a caller from California, Nick, who was talking about a book he has signed by the author, but from the library of Frederick W. Skiff. And the caller said that he researched him and found out that he was a rather noted book collector and appraiser. Have you ever heard of Frederick W. Skiff?
S-K-I-F-F, is that
I'm assuming so. That's the way I wrote it.
No, but I'll be happy to do a little bit of searching and report back next
All right.
week.
You've got your homework assignment.
You got your assignment, yeah.
And do you think in that collection were something from the Levelers? Are you familiar with the Levelers and their pamphleteering?
No, I'm not.
Oh, all right. Well, one of the things is in English history of Parliament versus the King was a group trying to get rights for the soldiers to have equivalent rights to citizens, since they were fighting on behalf of Parliament, and they became known as Levelers. And if you look at the program the Levelers were going with, you can see the early days of Thomas Paine and the American Constitution.
Well, I actually did a Levelers collection about 5 months ago for a local historian
Really?
who wrote a book on British military history from the 1600s.
Gentlemen, it's time to give one of Nick Basbane's books away as we have the Book Guys quiz coming up in a moment. We'll see you next week, Nick.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye, Nick.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
That's Nick Basbanes, author of the most of our prizes for the Book Guys quiz, which is coming up in just a moment. We're the Book Guys.
Two phenomenal collections of pamphlets in the last year. One, something Nick's talking about parliamentary pamphlets at Denison College in Ohio. But there's a local historian at GW, woman writer, who wrote an entire book on on the British Army
Uh-huh.
and the fact that it was so small, and it has multiple levelers pamphlets in it. Okay, if you're interested, I'll get you her number. So
Okay.
you can contact. You probably would have a good conversation.
Well, no one has really written about the connection between the levelers and
Along with Craig Nelson, our special guest and biographer of Thomas Paine, I'm Mike Cuthbert, along with Alan Stipek, and it's time for the Book Guys quiz, brought to you by the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress. Books give us wings, says the Center for the Book, and you can find out what they're doing at the website of the Library of Congress, www.loc.gov/LOC/CFBook. Prizes for our winners, all correct answers to our quizzes go in a hat, and we draw one out, and the prize goes to the person, and then they get to choose between the books of Nick Basbane's A Gentle Madness, Patience and Fortitude, Among the Gently Mad, A Splendor of Letters, or Every Book Its Reader. If he writes one more, I can't do them all in one breath. The Ahern's Collected Books, The Guide to Values 2002, or Book Collecting 2000, the Price Guide and Bibliographic Checklist for Children's and Illustrated Books 1880 to 1970, and of course the ever-popular and always accurate Book Guys Watch. We have a number of quizzes on our website, and for those of you new to the Book Guys, our website, bookguys.com, any of these quizzes which don't have an answer are still eligible for an answer. So you can go there and file your answers by email. The email link is on the web or at 1-800-828-BOOK, 828-2665. 5 weeks ago, we were talking about the Civil War, and we asked this question: which general did an irritated Abraham Lincoln address in these remarks? Will you pardon me for asking what the horses of your army have done since the Battle of Antietam that fatigues anything?
Do you want me to answer the question?
Sure.
George McClellan. And what other lousy things did Lincoln say against McClellan? We could write a whole book on that.
Who won the quiz?
Our winner is Eileen Byrne of Omaha, Nebraska, and we congratulate her with the correct answer.
And this week, which of our founding fathers said this? Without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been wielded in vain. That was not intended as verse, but it comes out that way. Without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been wielded in vain.
Do you know the answer, Craig? You can't say it on
Which
the
of
air.
our founding
Yeah,
fathers
but usually when you know
said
the
this?
answer, somebody like that. You didn't have that kind of, I know, look, you know.
Please file your answer at bookguys.com or 1-800-828-BOOK, and we'll hope that you're going to be a winner.
Got a poker face, man.
Well, I'm trying to decide if I should enter anonymously.
Quickly, we go to Michigan, and we have yet another abooks.com Treasures in Your Attic caller. Her name is Jeanette, and welcome to the program. Jeanette, what have you got for us?
Well, I have a book by Earl and Miriam Selby, written in 1971. Its title is Odyssey, Journey Through Black America.
Mm-hmm.
And it's signed by both authors and Rosa Parks.
Well, that's very collectible. Just tell me what the condition of the book is. Is it in very good condition?
I think it's in good condition.
Okay.
It has a couple little tears on the tops of the book jacket.
Mm-hmm. But realistically, it's attractive. You're not just giving it a mother's look because you love the book, but realistically, it is in very good or better condition.
Yes, it is.
Okay. In that condition, I'd probably price the book for about $500.
That's interesting because a book dealer offered me $100, but I decided to keep it and read it.
You did the right move. I mean, if you go up on the internet, I wouldn't be surprised if you see booksellers, book scouts, and individuals somewhere in the netherworld of the book collecting areas pricing Rosa Parks signatures, regardless of which books they're in, for about $250. And combining it with the signatures of the two authors, I think you have a nice association copy. But I would stick by my guns at $500.
Okay, now I have a stamp that I embossed that says Library of Jeanette D. Andrews. So right on that same page up there, I have
Goof.
Yeah.
That's a goof. Unless, Jeanette, you do something really incredibly good in your life that gives you some kind of public...
Yeah, go out and make your reputation immediately.
Right, and then we can double the price. But right now, that's not helpful if you're looking to sell the book. But since this is not a book you're particularly interested in selling, there's no problem.
Right.
Okay?
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
And once again, she participated in the abooks.com Treasures in Your Attic program. We'll hope to have another abooks.com caller next week. As you mentioned earlier in passing, Thomas Paine was a friend of George Washington's for almost his whole life. That almost, I'm reminded of a saying I heard recently. A man looked at his tombstone, or his wife's tombstone, and he noted the dates, 1930 to 2000, and he said, boy, did she do a lot with that dash. So what happened in the dash between Washington and Paine? What if eventually estranged them?
Well, Paine arrives in France to a hero's welcome. He's considered one of the great heroes of the Enlightenment and of Republican democracy. And Lafayette is still running the government. And almost immediately after Paine gets there, the King and Queen of France attempt to run away to safety in the arms of her relatives in Austria. And almost immediately after that, some letters the king had written to the Austrians asking them to invade the country were uncovered. So the king is tried for treason at the same time that Paine is being tried for treason in London. And Paine, during this period, aligns himself with what are called the Brissotins or the Girondins today, who were the group of French rulers who become between Lafayette and Robespierre. And partially, he aligns himself with them because they're very similar to the American founding fathers. They have almost the exact same philosophy. And partially, he aligns himself with them because they speak English. And he never really learns French, even though he's a French legislator. And so during the purge of the Girondins, Paine gets caught up in this, and he ends up being thrown in prison. And he spends almost a year in prison, almost dying. And he comes out, and he decides that one of the reasons he spent all this time in prison is George Washington ignoring him. And he becomes so upset by this, he writes a letter attacking George Washington, saying that he didn't really win the American Revolution and that he was a terrible general. And it was published in America by Benjamin Franklin's grandson, who was a terrible Washington critic, Benjamin Franklin Beach. And between Age of Reason Part 2 and Letter to Washington, Paine's American reputation was destroyed.
And yet he came back here eventually.
He really had enough of France under Napoleon, and there was no place else to go. And one of his very close friends, Thomas Jefferson, had just become president. So I think he came home expecting he would be greeted as one of the original founding fathers. But in fact, the Americans weren't that interested in the founding fathers anymore.
And also, wasn't the fact that half the people gave him a kind of hero's welcome, the other half basically threw rocks at him?
Yeah.
So he had to walk on one side of the street, but not the other.
So it was a very polarized period in the wake of the Adams presidency.
Craig, you point out that, in a way, John Adams has been vindicated, his view of what the United States should be, by the rise of the plutocracy in the United States and the rule of the rich and corporations, though he might rue the results. Their admired ruling elite no longer even pretends to lives of virtue, which might be said today, I'm afraid. Where does Paine's legacy still live?
Well, I think the number one thing he does is he inspires you to go back to fundamental ideas about America that gets lost. Fundamental ideas about equality before the law, about ordinary citizens being having as much a right to government as the rich, and the idea of that once you've made money or once you're comfortable, it's time to give something back to society, which was something that all of the founding fathers thought. It was an idea they'd gotten from the Romans, that they wanted to be famous for hundreds of years by contributing something civically. And they turned out to be right. And they turned out to, even Paine is famous for hundreds of years for doing exactly that.
The book is Thomas Paine, Enlightenment, Revolution, and the Birth of Modern Nations. Its author, Craig Nelson, has been our guest in this special C-SPAN edition of the Book Guys. We'd like to thank you very much for your work. It must have been fun because, as you say, the guy's readable.
It's fantastic. He is just unbelievable.
It read is fun. It really does.
Yes, it does.
It reads is fun.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. You guys are terrific.
Thank you.
The Book Guys was recorded in Washington, D.C. Our producer is Warren Wiggeto. Our engineer is Ken Mason. The Book Guys is made possible in part by Second Story Books in Washington. Join us next week on this same station for more about the world of books, reading, writing, publishing, and collecting with the Book Guys. Next week, we talk with the calligrapher to the Queen and chief calligrapher and production artist for the St. John's Bible Project, Donald Jackson. Real audio